Historical sites are fascinating no matter what. It might be difficult to escape the weight of history while strolling through historic sites or across a battlefield that has seen bloodshed. But this does not mean that there aren't secrets lurking beneath the surface of a historical site you believe you know everything about. Welcome to USA Stories Channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. For generations, a well-liked tourist destination in the English countryside was packed with visitors. But a first-time visitor's discovery revealed a sinister history that might permanently alter people's perception of this well-liked site. A community of like-minded individuals who share a few interests, abandoned mines, closed tube stations, and artificial caves, make up Subterranea Britannica. During a specific group excursion, the UK-based group comprised of two well-read subterranean enthusiasts. On a significant journey, Haley Clark and Ed Waters contributed their knowledge of ancient history and exceptional attention to detail. Collectively, the so-called Sub-Brits arrived in the British Midlands. They were going to Cresswell Crags, a limestone canyon home to a number of ancient caves that were inhabited more than 10,000 years ago. Ed and Haley halted abruptly a few feet into the entrance of the place known as the Robin Hood Cave. The two ran their hands over the cold surface of the stone walls immediately after. They had come onto something fascinating. Many thousands of years, ancient scratches and sculptures covered large portions of the interior walls made of limestone. The first thing you would notice upon entering the cave were the clear markings. Also, they appeared completely inconsequential to the uninformed eye. Residents and facility staff thought the carvings on the walls were pointless scribbles from the Victorian era for a long time. Until Haley and Ed spotted their insignia, everyone who passed through the cave saw them, but no one had ever realized what they really were. Overlooked for ages was the underlying significance. There were hundreds of distinct symbols engraved on the surface, but two letters, VV, drew people's attention away from the tour's amazement. Haley and Ed recognized the letters instantly as standing for a sentence with an odd significance. The prayer VV stood for Virgin of Virgins, asking Mary of Nazareth to shield her from evil influences. Every available surface that the carvers could access was covered in dozens of copies of the VV notes. Ed and Haley presented their results to the other tour participants. John Charlesworth, the heritage facilitator, was very amazed with their guide. He immediately contacted the Cresswell Heritage Trust, and specialists were sent in to go at the symbols. They thoroughly examined every area of the caverns, even the difficult-to-reach crevices. They discovered hastily written inscriptions that resembled the religious VV please, crosses, labyrinth designs, and boxes repeated ceremoniously. These messages were apparently designed to deceive bad spirits and then trap them. There was a huge red flag eventually, as the dramatic and severe significance of the marks became clear. What frightened these individuals all so much? It was obvious that a malevolent power had reduced them to such despair that they carved symbols for assistance on the cave walls. Finding the people who carved the images was the first step in answering the question. According to Alison Fern, a PhD candidate in archaeology at the University of Leicester, these apotropaic marks are typically connected to houses of worship or doorframes. Someone who would have to labor slowly and painstakingly for hours on end, chiseling away at stone, is acting out of dread. The second frequent name for apotropaic markings, witch marks, may have something to do with the underlying reason of this hysteria. Working with Historic England, historians from Cresswell Heritage established that the marks were carved by locals of Cresswell, which lies close, and that they date from the 14th to the 18th centuries. Although it is impossible to definitively show that the residents of Cresswell were under the influence of a real-life witch, the sheer volume of the marks suggests that unsettling things were occurring. There are centuries-old links between the natural world and the paranormal, and with the magnificent lake and cliffs surrounding the caverns, it was easy to understand how the caves could be a source of power. Alternatively, it's conceivable that the people were suffering from gruesome illnesses or crippling poverty and resorted to the caverns to carry out a ceremony in an attempt to save themselves, accusing a witch. Their final straw could have been some unidentified desperation. Whatever the reason, the Creswell Crags caverns offered a powerful visual representation of something evil. Everyone on the trip felt a twinge of terror as the group realized what the marks meant. Equipped with his newfound understanding of the plethora of symbols, Paul Baker, the director of the Creswell Crags Museum and Heritage Center, remarked, "It was like something from The Shining." Of all the locations in Britain, Creswell Crags contains the greatest number of apotropaic marks known. However, a plethora of other eerie finds have been found across the historically rich English terrain. The museum director of London's Garden Museum, Christopher Woodward, had grand plans for the centuries-old structure he oversaw, so it was only natural that he became alarmed when Carl Patton, the site manager, contacted and made a menacing request. "I think you better come here quickly," Carl said to Christopher on the phone. Given the building's history, it seemed like terrible news, and a lot might go wrong. For example, the museum was housed in Lambeth's old church, St. Mary, which is close to the River Thames. The Canterbury Archbishop's Palace stood next to it, and Westminster Abbey was on the other side of the river. The irreplaceable construction of these precious structures was ruined. Carl outlined the circumstances to Christopher when he arrived at the museum. "As part of this job, we were exposing the ground, and we uncovered an entry to what looked like a tomb," Carl remarked. Christopher's thoughts were rushing. "It shouldn't have been able to find a tomb," Christopher clarified. "We were informed there wasn't a crypt because it was so near the Thames that it would have flooded, and thousands, if not hundreds, of coffins were removed in the 1850s to make room for underfloor heating." What on earth had Carl discovered then? Carl, on the right, grabbed a camera, hung it from a pole, and dropped it into the chamber, all the while prioritizing his safety. The guys then looked inside the church's lower level from the ground level. There were 30 coffins, precisely, down through the hatch. The dazzling item resting on one of the coffins was much more intriguing than the coffins themselves. Christopher was blown away. "When I first answered the phone, I thought it sounded like terrible news or an issue, but wow, it's a headpiece. Shining there in the darkness is the mitre of an archbishop." However, that wasn't the most astounding finding in some way. The lower-level crypt contained the coffins of 5 archbishops, each with a distinguished and historically significant background. For example, a plaque bearing the name John Moore was attached to one coffin. The tenure of John Moore as archbishop was from 1783 until 1805. Known for his friendliness, he spearheaded campaigns to save Sunday schools and ongoing missionary endeavors. One coffin in particular drew the attention of the historians working on the project. In addition to Archbishops Matthew Hutton, 1757-1758, Frederick Cornwallis, 1768-1783, and Thomas Tennyson, 1695-1715. On the left, Christopher also found the bones of Archbishop Richard Bancroft, 1768-1783, on the right. You may have heard of his work before. Bancroft served as archbishop from 1604 to 1610. He was in charge of writing and releasing the King James Version of the Bible during his time there. The project's participating historians couldn't conceal their excitement. Historian and gardener Wesley Kerr remarked, "To know that possibly the person that committed the King James Bible is buried here is the most incredible discovery." It significantly enhances this project's texture. However, the crypt held a great deal of secrets as well. Since the contents of all 30 coffins had not yet been recognized, Christopher remarked, "We still don't know who else is down there." Nevertheless, there may have been more archbishops and their families in the church's past. "There were 2 lives in this church," stated Christopher. "It was Lambeth's parish church, but it was also Lambeth Palace's own annex. Many archbishops have made the decision to worship and be buried there over the ages." The fact that this finding was made over all odds was perhaps the most astounding of all. "This building has been examined by every archaeologist in London," Christopher remarked, "but nobody has told us to expect to find anything." Regarding Christopher's discoveries, he had no big intentions to take the crown or the coffins out. He didn't fully hide the bodies from view, but he and the Garden Museum respected the deceased by leaving them exactly where they were. Upon completion of the £7.5 million, 18-month renovation effort in 2017, the Garden Museum unveiled a solitary glass panel intended to conceal the tomb's entrance, What did that imply for visitors to the Garden Museum then? It implied that they too may discover the Archbishop's secret crypt as they browsed the museum and examined exhibits that exquisitely depicted snippets of London's colorful past. Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.